Mother dog dragged behind a car and left to die, but her story will inspire millions. The sun was setting on the lonely stretch of road, painting the horizon with shades of burnt orange and deep purple. The landscape stretched endlessly, barren and harsh, as if the earth itself had forgotten this place. Amidst the stillness, a figure lay motionless, her battered body half covered in dust. She was a dog, her fur matted with blood and dirt, and her chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Her eyes, once swollen shut, flickered open briefly to glance at the small shapes huddled against her side. 3 tiny puppies nestled close, their fragile bodies trembling as they whimpered softly, sensing their mother's pain but too young to understand it. The mother dog had endured what no creature should ever have to. Her body bore the evidence of unspeakable cruelty, her hind legs raw and torn from being dragged across the unforgiving asphalt. The acrid scent of burnt rubber and dried blood still lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of what had transpired. Yet, despite her agony, she clung to life, her only purpose now to shield her pups from the merciless world around them. The puppies nuzzled against her, their tiny noses seeking warmth and comfort. They hadn't yet opened their eyes to the world, a blessing in disguise given the grim reality of their situation. The mother dog, weak as she was, nudged them closer with what little strength remained in her. Her instincts drove her to protect them, to give them a chance, however slim, at survival. The road stretched out before her, empty and desolate. There was no sign of help, no sound of approaching footsteps or distant engines. Just the vast, empty plains and the oppressive silence that seemed to mock her struggle. She closed her eyes briefly, the weight of exhaustion pulling at her, but the soft cries of her pups brought her back. She couldn't rest. Not yet. The memories of the past hours were a blur, flashes of terror and pain. She remembered the vehicle, the rough hands that tied the rope around her neck, the cold metallic taste of fear as she was thrown onto the ground. The car had sped off, the rope pulling her along like a rag doll, her body scraping against the road with every jolt. She had tried to fight, her legs flailing, her claws scratching at the ground, but the car didn't stop. It was only when the rope snapped, worn thin from the relentless friction, that she was finally released. The car disappeared into the distance, leaving her broken and bleeding in the dirt. Yet, even then, her thoughts had been with her puppies. She had dragged herself across the road, inch by agonizing inch, to where they were hidden in a ditch nearby. Somehow she had found them, their tiny squeals of hunger and fear guiding her through the haze of pain. Hours passed as the night crept in. The air grew colder, and the puppies began to shiver. The mother dog tried to curl around them, shielding them from the chill, but her body was failing her. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, and every movement sent waves of agony through her battered frame. Still, she didn't give up. She couldn't. Her puppies needed her, and that was all that mattered. In the distance, a faint glimmer of light appeared, faint and flickering like a firefly against the dark expanse. It grew brighter, closer, until the sound of an engine broke the stillness. A car. The mother dog's ears perked up, though her body remained still. She didn't have the strength to move, but she watched, her good eye trained on the approaching vehicle. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and hope. Would they stop? Would they help? Or would they pass by like so many others had? The car slowed as it approached, its headlights illuminating the heartbreaking scene. A woman stepped out, her silhouette framed by the harsh light. She hesitated for a moment, taking in the sight before her, the injured dog, the tiny puppies clinging to her side. The woman's face softened, her hand covering her mouth as she whispered, "Oh my God." She moved closer, her footsteps cautious but deliberate. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The mother dog's body tensed, a faint growl escaping her throat. Despite her condition, she was still protective of her pups. The woman knelt a few feet away, lowering herself to the dog's eye level. She reached out slowly, her hand open and non-threatening. "You're okay now," she murmured. "I won't hurt you." The mother dog's growl faded into a whimper as the woman inched closer. The puppies stirred, their tiny cries breaking the woman's heart. She noticed the extent of the mother's injuries, the raw wounds, the patches of missing fur, the blood that stained the ground beneath her. It was a miracle she was still alive. "I need to get you some help," the woman said, her voice firm despite the tears welling in her eyes. She removed her jacket, laying it gently over the dog and her pups. The mother flinched at the contact but didn't resist. "You're so brave," the woman whispered. Just hold on a little longer." She stood and hurried back to her car, retrieving a blanket and a water bottle. When she returned, she wrapped the mother dog and her puppies carefully, lifting them into her arms. The dog didn't fight. She was too weak to protest. Instead, she rested her head against the woman's chest, her body trembling with every shallow breath. The woman placed them gently on the back seat of her car, making sure the puppies were nestled securely against their mother. She turned the heater on full blast, hoping to ward off the night's chill. "You're safe now," she said, more to herself than to the dog. "I promise I'll take care of you." As the car sped off into the night, the mother dog closed her eyes, the rhythmic hum of the engine lulling her into a fragile sense of security. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to hope. The car sped down the dark, desolate road, its headlights cutting through the night. The woman glanced in the rearview mirror, her heart pounding as she saw the fragile figures huddled together in the back seat. The mother dog's breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of her chest a painful reminder of her condition. The puppies, unaware of the gravity of the situation, squirmed and nuzzled against her for warmth and comfort. The woman tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her mind racing. She had to get them help, and fast. She reached for her phone, dialing the number of the nearest animal clinic she could find. The line rang once, twice, before a groggy voice answered. "This is Dr. Patel. I need help," the woman blurted, her voice shaking. "I found an injured dog. She's in terrible shape, and she has puppies with her. I'm on my way to your clinic. Please, just be ready." The vet's tone shifted immediately. "How far are you?" "About 20 minutes, the woman replied, her eyes darting to the clock on the dashboard. "I'll be there as soon as I can." "Drive carefully," Dr. Patel said firmly. "We'll be ready when you get here." The call ended, leaving the woman alone with her thoughts. She glanced back again, her chest tightening at the sight of the battered dog. "Hang in there," she whispered. "We're almost there." The road seemed endless, every mile stretching into an eternity. The woman couldn't stop thinking about the cruelty that had brought this dog to her. Who could do something so heartless? The image of the dog's injuries flashed in her mind, and her hands tightened on the wheel. But she pushed the anger aside. Right now, all that mattered was getting them to safety. Finally, the clinic's lights came into view, a beacon of hope in the darkness. The woman pulled into the parking lot, slamming the car into park before jumping out. The clinic doors burst open as Dr. Patel and a veterinary assistant rushed out with a stretcher. In the back seat, the woman said, her voice cracking. Dr. Patel opened the car door and froze for a moment, taking in the scene. His expression hardened, and he motioned to the assistant. "Careful now. We don't want to startle her." The assistant gently scooped up the puppies first, wrapping them in a soft towel. They squeaked and wriggled but quickly settled as they were placed in a small heated crate. Then came the mother. Dr. Patel approached her cautiously, speaking in soothing tones. "You're a strong girl," he murmured. "We're here to help you." The mother dog let out a weak whine but didn't resist as they lifted her onto the stretcher. Her body was limp, her head resting on the edge as they carried her inside. The woman followed close behind, her hands clenched into fists as she fought back tears. Inside the clinic, the air buzzed with urgency. The mother dog was placed on a padded table, her wounds illuminated under the harsh overhead lights. Dr. Patel began his examination, his hands moving with practiced precision. "She's in bad shape," he said grimly. "Severe lacerations, signs of dehydration, and possible internal injuries. We'll need x-rays to confirm." The woman hovered nearby, her heart in her throat. "Will she make it?" Dr. Patel glanced at her, his expression softening. "We'll do everything we can." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The vet cleaned the dog's wounds, applying antiseptic and stitching the deeper gashes. Fluids were administered through and for, and a small oxygen mask was placed over her snout to help her breathe. Through it all, the mother dog remained still, her body too weak to fight. The puppies, meanwhile, were examined and found to be in surprisingly good health. They had some scrapes and were a bit underweight, but their mother's care had kept them alive. The woman sat beside their crate, watching as they tumbled over one another, blissfully unaware of the chaos around them. By the time the sun began to rise, the mother dog had been stabilized. Dr. Patel removed his gloves and turned to the woman, exhaustion etched into his features. "She's a fighter," he said, "but the next 48 hours are critical. We'll need to monitor her closely." The woman nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for saving her." Dr. Patel gave her a small smile. She saved herself. All we did was give her a chance. The woman stayed at the clinic for hours, unable to bring herself to leave. She sat by the mother dog's side, speaking to her in gentle tones. "You're incredible, you know that," she murmured. "What you've been through, and you still hold on. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." The dog's good eye flickered open for a moment, and the woman swore she saw a spark of gratitude. It was fleeting, but it was enough to bring tears to her eyes. The puppies were reunited with their mother later that day, their tiny bodies curling against hers as if they had never been apart. The sight brought a bittersweet smile to the woman's face. Despite everything, this little family had survived. But the story wasn't over yet. There were still questions to be answered, justice to be sought. And the mother dog's journey, her fight for survival, and her unwavering love for her puppies was just beginning. The woman stayed by the mother dog's side as the hours passed, unwilling to leave her alone. She watched as the dog's chest rose and fell steadily, a rhythm that was fragile yet persistent, like the faintest flicker of a flame refusing to be extinguished. The puppies had burrowed into her side, their tiny breaths warm against her fur, oblivious to the battle their mother was fighting. Every now and then, one would let out a soft squeak, and the woman couldn't help but smile through her tears. She leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've already done the impossible, girl," she whispered. "You just need to hold on a little longer. They need you, and so do I." The veterinary clinic was quiet now, the earlier urgency replaced by a calm, almost reverent stillness. Dr. Patel returned periodically, checking on the dog's condition and ensuring her four was working properly. Each time, he nodded with a hint of approval, though he made no promises. The next 48 hours, as he had said, would determine everything. It wasn't long before word of the mother dog's story began to spread. The woman had taken a photo of the dog and her puppies when they arrived at the clinic, capturing the heartbreaking scene of resilience and hope. She posted it on social media, not with the intention of gaining attention, but simply to share the gravity of what had happened. Her caption was simple: "This mother was left to die, but she fought to protect her babies. We need to help her." Within hours, the post had gone viral. Comments flooded in from strangers around the world, each one filled with outrage, sympathy, and offers to help. Donations began pouring into the clinic, enough to cover not only the mother dog's treatment but also future care for her puppies. People wanted to know her story, how she had been found, who had done this to her, and most importantly, how they could ensure she would never suffer again. The woman scrolled through the messages on her phone, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. She looked up at the mother dog, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and determination. "You've inspired so many people already," she said softly. "They see your strength, and they're rooting for you." As the second day dawned, there were small signs of improvement. The mother dog's breathing had grown steadier, and though she was still weak, her good eye began to follow movements around the room. She even managed to lift her head slightly when one of the puppies squealed, her maternal instincts overriding her pain. It was a small victory, but it filled the woman and the clinic staff with hope. Dr. Patel examined her again that afternoon, his expression thoughtful. "She's responding well," he said, addressing the woman. "Her wounds are healing, and her vitals are stable. But it's her spirit that impresses me most. She's still fighting, and I think she knows she has a reason to." The woman nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "She's incredible. I've never seen anything like her." Dr. Patel smiled faintly. "Neither have I, and I've been doing this for a long time." Despite the glimmers of hope, the scars the mother dog's ordeal were undeniable. Her body was a patchwork of healing wounds and raw reminders of what she had endured. The staff worked tirelessly to keep her comfortable, ensuring she had everything she needed to recover. The puppies, blissfully unaware, grew stronger each day, their tiny cries turning into playful yips as they explored the warmth of their enclosure. The woman visited every day, bringing toys and treats for the puppies and sitting by the mother dog's side for hours. She had begun calling her Grace, the name she felt embodied the dog's strength and resilience. It felt right, as though the name itself carried a sense of dignity that Grace had earned through her struggle. On the third day, a breakthrough came. The woman entered the clinic as usual, carrying a small bag of supplies. She approached Grace's enclosure, expecting to find her lying down as she had been for days. But to her astonishment, Grace was sitting up. Her head was low, and her movements were slow, but she was upright, her body trembling slightly with the effort. Her puppies clustered around her, nuzzling at her fur with renewed energy. The woman gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Grace, oh my God, you're sitting up." Tears welled at her eyes as she crouched down, reaching through the bars to stroke Grace's fur. "You're amazing. Do you know that? Absolutely amazing." Grace let out a soft whine, leaning slightly into the woman's touch. Her tail, which had been limp for days, gave the faintest of wags. It was a moment so simple yet so profound that the woman felt her heart swell with pride and love. This dog, who had been dragged to the brink of death, was choosing to fight her way back. And she was doing it not just for herself, but for her puppies. Dr. Patel entered the room a few moments later, stopping in his tracks when he saw Grace. "Well, I'll be," he said with a grin. "She's full of surprises, isn't she?" The woman nodded, unable to speak. She simply watched as Grace, with painstaking effort, lowered her head to nudge one of her puppies closer to her side. The little one squealed in delight, pawing at her with tiny, uncoordinated movements. The next week brought more progress. Grace began eating small amounts of food on her own, her appetite returning slowly but surely. Her wounds, though still tender, began to heal more noticeably, the raw edges fading into scars that told the story of her survival. The puppies grew stronger, their playful antics bringing life and laughter to the clinic. But Grace's story wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation. The woman had decided early on that she would adopt Grace and her puppies once they were well enough to leave the clinic. She couldn't imagine parting with them, not after everything they had been through together. As the days turned into weeks, Grace's transformation became nothing short of miraculous. The dog who had once been left broken and battered on a desolate road now stood, albeit unsteadily, with a quiet dignity that silenced anyone who saw her. Each day brought small victories. Her wounds healed a little more, her coat began to regain a faint shine, and her strength slowly returned. The woman who had made it her mission to be by Grace's side felt her heart swell with pride each time she saw those tiny but meaningful steps. The puppies, too, thrived in the safety of the clinic. Their once fragile bodies grew plumper, their tiny legs wobbling as they chased each other in endless circles. They yipped and barked, filling the quiet clinic with the sound of life and joy. Grace watched them with unwavering devotion, her gaze following their every move. Though her body was scarred, her spirit shone through in the way she nudged them gently with her nose, guiding them, protecting them, and offering a mother's love that no hardship could diminish. The woman, now a regular fixture at the clinic, spent hours playing with the puppies and talking to Grace. She had started calling the puppies Hope, Brave, and Spirit, names that felt fitting for their journey. Every moment she spent with them only strengthened her resolve to bring them home. They weren't just dogs to her anymore, they were family. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the clinic's windows, Grace did something that left everyone in the room stunned. The woman had been sitting beside her enclosure, softly humming as she stroked Grace's fur. The puppies were curled up in a pile, fast asleep. Grace, who had been resting her head on her paws, suddenly lifted it. Her good eye focused on the woman, and then, with a deliberate effort, she stood on shaky legs. "Grace," the woman whispered, her heart pounding as she watched. Grace took a tentative step forward, her legs trembling under the weight of her body. Then another step, and another. By the time she reached the edge of the enclosure, the woman was already in tears. Grace leaned her head against the woman's outstretched hand, her tail wagging slowly but unmistakably. "She's walking," the woman murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "She's really walking." Dr. Patel, who had been observing from the doorway, smiled warmly. "That's the spirit we've been waiting to see. She's ready to move forward." The days that followed were filled with preparation. The woman worked tirelessly to create a safe, loving space for Grace and her puppies in her home. She set up soft beds, bought toys and treats, and even had a small fenced area installed in her backyard where they could play safely. The thought of seeing Grace and her pups in a warm, happy environment kept her going. On the day Grace was finally cleared to leave the clinic, the woman arrived early, her heart racing with excitement. The staff gathered around to say their goodbyes, many of them tearful as they stroked Grace's fur and kissed the puppies' tiny heads. Grace, though still cautious, seemed to understand that these people had saved her life. She let out a soft whine of gratitude, her tail wagging faintly as she nuzzled each of them in turn. "You're taking a real hero home," Dr. Patel told the woman as he handed her Grace's file. She's been through so much, but she's come out stronger. That's something special. I'll make sure she knows she's loved, the woman promised, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. The ride home was quiet, save for the occasional yip from one of the puppies. Grace lay on a blanket in the back seat, her head resting on the woman's lap. She seemed at peace, her body relaxed in a way it hadn't been since that terrible day on the road. The woman stroked her gently, whispering words of reassurance. "This is your new beginning, Grace. You and your babies are safe now." When they arrived at the woman's home, Grace hesitated at the threshold, her body tensing as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. But the woman knelt beside her, holding out a treat and speaking softly. "Come on, girl. This is your home now. You don't have to be afraid." Grace took a cautious step forward, her puppies tumbling in after her. They explored the space with wide eyes and wagging tails, their playful antics bringing a smile to the woman's face. Grace followed slowly, her movements deliberate as she sniffed the air and surveyed the room. She seemed to relax as the puppies began to play, their joy infectious. Over the next few weeks, Grace settled into her new life. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and her bond with the woman deepened. She no longer flinched at sudden movements or loud noises, and her tail wagged more frequently, a sign of the trust she had begun to rebuild. The puppies grew into healthy, rambunctious little bundles of energy, their days filled with play and mischief. But Grace's story didn't end there. The woman, inspired by the outpouring of support Grace's story had received, began to share updates online. She posted photos and videos of Grace and her puppies, showing their journey from despair to hope. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the world reached out, sharing their own stories of resilience and offering to help animals in need. Grace became a symbol of strength and survival, her story touching the hearts of millions. Animal shelters reported an increase in adoptions, and donations poured in to support rescue efforts. The woman couldn't believe the impact Grace had made, but she knew it was a testament to the dog's unbreakable spirit. Late one evening, as the woman sat on the couch with Grace curled up beside her, she reflected on how far they had come. She stroked Grace's fur, her voice soft and full of love. "You've changed so many lives, Grace. Not just mine, but so many others. You're a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's still hope." Grace lifted her head, her gaze meeting the woman's. In that moment, it felt as though she understood every word. Her tail thumped against the couch, and she let out a contented sigh, resting her head on the woman's lap. Over the following months, Grace's story continued to grow, spreading beyond the small online community that had first rallied to save her. News outlets picked it up, drawn by the emotional narrative of a mother dog who had survived unimaginable cruelty and still found the strength to nurture her puppies. Local reporters came to the woman's home, capturing footage of Grace playing with her puppies in the backyard, her scars now a testament to her resilience rather than her suffering. Grace had become a symbol of hope, a living example of what compassion and perseverance could achieve. People across the country and even abroad wrote letters and sent messages, sharing how Grace had inspired them to adopt rescue animals or volunteer at their local shelters. One letter in particular stood out to the woman. It was from a man who had been struggling with depression. He wrote about how Grace's story had reminded him of the strength within himself, of the ability to heal even after life's greatest hardships. The woman sat on her living room floor, reading the letter aloud to Grace. "You don't even know it, girl," she said, scratching behind Grace's ears, "but you're saving people too. Not just animals." Grace's tail thumped against the floor as though she understood, her eyes warm and trusting. She was no longer the wary, broken creature who had flinched at every touch. Now she leaned into affection, her body relaxed and her spirit lighter. Her puppies, no longer tiny and fragile, were bounding around the room, their boundless energy filling the house with laughter and life. One morning, as the puppies tumbled over each other in the backyard, the woman received a call she hadn't expected. It was from a local law enforcement officer. "We've been following Grace's case," the officer said, his voice steady but serious. "We think we've identified the people responsible for what happened to her." The woman froze, the weight of those words sinking in. She had thought about justice for Grace many times, but had never imagined it would come to fruition. "You found them?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We have a lead," the officer replied. "It's not conclusive yet, but we're working on it. If we confirm their involvement, we'll need you to provide a statement about how you found her." The woman agreed without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, the investigation unfolded slowly. The woman provided her account of the night she found Grace, detailing the state the dog had been in and the evidence of her injuries. The clinic's records, including photos and Dr. Patel's reports, became critical pieces of evidence. Though the process was emotionally exhausting, the woman remained steadfast. Grace had survived something horrific, and if there was a chance to hold those responsible accountable, she wouldn't shy away from it. In the meantime, life at home continued. Grace began to rediscover joy in the simplest of things, basking in the sunlight, rolling in the grass, and chasing her puppies as they darted across the yard. The woman often found herself marveling at the transformation. Grace was not just surviving, she was thriving. One afternoon, as Grace lay on the porch watching her puppies play, the woman sat beside her, a cup of tea in hand. "You've taught me so much," she said, her voice soft. "About strength, about love. You never gave up, even when the world gave you every reason to. I hope you know how proud I am of you." Grace turned her head, resting it on the woman's lap. Her eyes, filled with a quiet wisdom, seemed to say that she understood. By the time the investigation reached its conclusion, the woman had prepared herself for whatever came next. The suspects, a group of individuals with a history of animal cruelty, were brought to court. The evidence presented was damning, and the woman's testimony played a crucial role in securing a conviction. They were sentenced to significant penalties, including jail time and lifelong bans on owning animals. The news brought a wave of relief, not just to the woman but to the countless people who had followed Grace's story. Messages poured in again, this time celebrating the justice that had been served. Yet, for the woman, the most important thing was that Grace and her puppies were safe and loved. Nothing could erase what had happened to her, but knowing that the people responsible would never harm another animal brought a sense of closure. The day after the court's decision, the woman decided to take Grace and the puppies on their first trip to a nearby park. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind that seemed to radiate possibility. As they walked along the path, people stopped to admire the little family. Some recognized Grace from her story, their faces lighting up with joy and amazement. One child, holding her mother's hand, pointed at Grace and said, "Mommy, that's the hero dog." The woman smiled, bending down to scratch Grace behind her ears. "That's right," she said to the child. "She's a hero." Grace seemed to sense the pride in the woman's voice. She lifted her head higher, her tail wagging as she trotted alongside her puppies. The scars on her body no longer defined her. They were simply part of her journey, a testament to her strength and the love that had helped her heal. That evening, back at home, the woman sat on the couch with Grace beside her. The puppies, exhausted from their adventure, were curled up in a pile on the floor. The house was quiet, save for the soft sound of breathing and the occasional rustle of the puppies shifting in their sleep. The woman ran her hand gently along Grace's back, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've come so far, girl. You've taught the world what it means to never give up. And because of you, so many other animals are getting a second chance." Grace leaned into her touch, her body relaxed and her heart full. In that moment, everything felt right. The journey that had begun on a lonely road with heartbreak and pain had brought them here, to a place of peace, love, and hope. And for the first time in a long time, both the woman and Grace knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. As the days turned into months, Grace's story became a cornerstone of hope and transformation in the woman's life. The puppies, Hope, Brave, and Spirit, grew into healthy, mischievous young dogs, each with their unique personality. Hope was the quietest, often curling up near Grace's side as if she could sense her mother's need for comfort. Brave lived up to his name, bounding through the backyard with fearless energy, chasing every leaf and butterfly in sight. Spirit, true to her name, carried a spark of mischief and boundless curiosity, often leading her siblings into harmless trouble. Grace had become the matriarch of this little family, presence calming and grounding. Though her scars remained, they no longer felt like remnants of pain. Instead, they were symbols of survival, reminders of how far she had come. The woman often found herself marveling at the transformation, not just in Grace, but in herself as well. Grace had brought something profound into her life, a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of resilience, and a bond that words could never truly capture. One crisp autumn morning, as the first golden leaves began to fall, the woman decided to take Grace and the puppies to a local animal rescue event. The community had organized it as a way to encourage adoptions, raise funds for shelters, and share stories like Grace's to inspire action. The woman had been hesitant at first, worried the crowds might overwhelm Grace, But Dr. Patel had reassured her. Grace is stronger than you think, he'd said, and her story might inspire others to help animals in need. When they arrived, the event was already bustling with families, volunteers, and a parade of animals hoping to find their forever homes. The puppies, now big enough to walk on leashes, darted excitedly in every direction, their tails wagging as they sniffed at everything in sight. Grace walked calmly beside the woman, her head held high, her movements steady and confident. People stopped in their tracks when they saw her, recognizing her from the articles and videos that had circulated online. Whispers followed her path. That's the dog who survived being dragged behind a car. She saved her puppies. She's a real hero. A volunteer approached the woman, her eyes wide with admiration. Is this Grace? She asked, kneeling to meet the dog's gaze. I've followed her story since the beginning. She's incredible. The woman smiled, nodding as she stroked Grace's fur. She really is. The volunteer reached out tentatively, and Grace surprised everyone by stepping forward, pressing her nose gently into the woman's hand. The volunteer's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered, as if speaking directly to Grace. You've shown us all what it means to keep fighting. Throughout the event, Grace and her puppies drew a crowd. Children giggled as the puppies licked their hands and chased after tennis balls, while adults listened intently as the woman shared Grace's story. Many people were moved to donate or sign up as volunteers for local shelters, inspired by the journey of this once-broken dog who had found the strength to heal. One couple, in particular, caught the woman's attention. They had been lingering near Grace's enclosure for a long time, their faces filled with quiet admiration. Finally, the man spoke. We've been thinking about adopting a dog for a while, he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. And seeing Grace today, it feels like a sign. She's given us hope. If she can find the strength to keep going, maybe we can too. The woman felt a lump form in her throat as she listened. You won't regret it, she said softly. Dogs like Grace have a way of changing your life. By the end of the day, several animals had found new homes, and the event had raised enough money to support the local shelter for months. As the woman packed up to leave, she looked down at Grace, who was lying on a blanket in the shade, her puppies curled up beside her. You did something amazing today, the woman said, her voice filled with pride. Because of you, so many animals are getting a second chance. Grace lifted her head, her eyes meeting the woman's. In that moment, it felt as though she understood exactly what had been said. The drive home was peaceful, the afternoon sun casting warm golden light across the fields. The puppies, exhausted from their adventures, slept soundly in the back seat, their tiny snores filling the car. Grace sat in the passenger seat, her head resting on the woman's lap. The woman kept one hand on the wheel and the other on Grace, stroking her fur gently. You've given me so much, she said quietly. I hope you know how loved you are. Back at home, life settled into a steady rhythm. The puppies continued to grow, their personalities blossoming with each passing day. Hope remained the gentle soul of the group, always looking out for her siblings. Brave was the protector, barking at every squirrel and shadow that dared enter their yard. Spirit, ever the adventurer, kept everyone on their toes with her endless curiosity. And Grace was the heart of it all. She had become more than just a survivor. She was a teacher, a healer, a source of inspiration. She had shown the woman what it meant to persevere, to trust, and to love unconditionally. Every scar on her body told a story, not of pain, but of resilience. One evening, as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, the woman sat by the fireplace with Grace at her side. The puppies were sprawled across the rug, their playful antics replaced by the contentment of a deep sleep. The woman held a cup of tea in her hands, her thoughts drifting as she watched the flames dance. I wonder if you know just how special you are, she said, her voice soft. You brought so much light into this world, Grace. And not just to me, but to everyone who's heard your story. Grace turned her head, resting it on the woman's lap. Her eyes, filled with the same quiet wisdom that had captivated the woman from the start, seemed to say, I know. The woman smiled, her heart full. Grace had taught her so much, but perhaps the greatest lesson was this. Even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, love and kindness could heal. It didn't erase the past, but it built a future worth fighting for. And as the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in white, the woman knew that their journey together was just beginning. The first sign that something was wrong came late one night, a distant sound barely audible over the quiet hum of the heater. Grace's ears twitched, her body tensing as she lifted her head from the bed where she lay nestled with her puppies. The woman had fallen asleep on the couch, a book resting open on her chest. Grace's low growl rumbled through the room, and the woman stirred awake, groggy and disoriented. "What is it, girl?" she murmured, rubbing her eyes. Grace didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the front door. The woman's heart quickened as she followed Grace's gaze. The house was silent, but the dog's instincts were rarely wrong. She sat up, the hairs on the back of her neck prickling with unease. A sharp knock broke the silence, loud and sudden. Grace leapt to her feet, standing protectively in front of her puppies, her growl growing louder. The knock came again, harder this time, and the woman's stomach churned. She wasn't expecting anyone, and it was well past midnight. Who could it be? Steeling herself, she walked to the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. She hesitated, glancing back at Grace, who stood rigid, her body a wall between the intruder and her babies. The woman took a deep breath and opened the door a crack. A man stood on the porch, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of a baseball cap. His clothes were worn, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Evening," he said, his voice gruff. "Sorry to bother you so late." Her grip on the door tightened. "Can I help you?" The man shifted, his eyes darting past her into the house. "I heard you've got a dog," he said. "One that's been in the news. Figured I'd come see for myself." Her blood ran cold. Something about his tone, casual but probing, sent a wave of alarm through her. She stepped out, pulling the door partially closed behind her. "It's late," she said, her voice firm. "You should go." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No need to be rude. Just curious, that's all. Heard she's a real fighter." The way he said it made her skin crawl. She glanced back at the house, her heart pounding. Grace's growl had turned into a bark loud and fierce, echoing through the small home. "I think it's time for you to leave," the woman said, her voice sharper now. The man took a step closer, his posture shifting into something more threatening. "You're awful protective," he said, his voice dropping. "I just wanted to take a look. Maybe see if she's as tough as they say." Her heart raced as realization dawned. He wasn't just curious, he wanted something. Maybe he was connected to the people who had hurt Grace, or maybe he was just another cruel opportunist looking to exploit her story. Either way, she couldn't let him anywhere near her dog or her home. "Get off my property," she said, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her stomach. She stepped back, her hand gripping the door. "I'll call the police." The man's smile faded, replaced by a sneer. "No need for that," he said. "I'm leaving." He turned and walked down the steps, disappearing into the shadows. The woman watched until she was sure he was gone, her breath coming in shaky gasps. She locked the door and leaned against it, her hands trembling. Grace patted over, her body still tense but her eyes soft as she looked up at the woman. "It's okay, girl," she whispered, crouching down to stroke Grace's fur. "We're safe." But she wasn't entirely sure. That night, she hardly slept, her mind racing with thoughts of the man and his cryptic words. Was he alone? Would he come back? And what did he want with Grace? The next morning, she called Dr. Patel to explain what had happened. "It sounds like he might have been connected to whoever hurt her," the vet said, his voice grim. "You need to be careful. People like that don't just go away." The woman nodded, gripping the phone tightly. "I won't let anything happen to her," she said. "Or the puppies." Over the next few days, she took precautions, installing cameras, reinforcing the locks, and making sure she wasn't followed when she left the house. Grace seemed to sense the tension, her protective instincts on high alert. She rarely let the puppies out of her sight, her eyes scanning the yard even during their playtime. The woman tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the fear lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting. Her fears were confirmed one evening when she noticed a car parked at the end of her street. It wasn't a neighbor's, and it hadn't moved for hours. She called the police, but by the time they arrived, the car was gone. The stress began to take its toll. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, her sleep restless and filled with nightmares. Grace, ever perceptive, stayed close to her side, her presence a constant reminder of why she was fighting so hard. Then, one night, the unthinkable happened. The woman woke to the sound of glass shattering. She bolted upright, her heart hammering in her chest. Grace was already on her feet, her ears pinned back as she let out a ferocious bark. The puppies whimpered, huddling together in the corner of the room. The woman grabbed her phone, dialing 911 as she ran to the living room. She froze in the doorway. The window was broken, shards of glass glinting on the floor. A figure stood in the shadows, their face obscured by a hood. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice shaking. Grace stepped in front of her, her growl low and menacing. The intruder hesitated, their eyes darting between the woman and the dog. "You don't want to do this," she said, her voice steadier now. "The police are on their way." For a moment, the intruder didn't move. Then, with a muttered curse, they turned and bolted, disappearing into the night. The woman locked the door and clutched Grace's collar, her whole body trembling. When the police arrived, they assured her they would patrol the area and investigate, but the damage had been done. The sanctuary she had created for Grace and the puppies no longer felt safe. Yet, as she sat on the floor with Grace that night, tears streaming down her face, she realized something. Grace wasn't just the one who needed saving. She was the one who had taught the woman how to fight. The morning after the break-in, sunlight streamed through the fractured window, casting long shadows on the living room floor. The woman sat cross-legged beside Grace, her hand resting on the dog's scarred but sturdy back. The puppies tumbled nearby, oblivious to the tension that still lingered in the air. Though her heart was heavy, the woman knew one thing for certain: she couldn't let fear dictate their lives. Grace hadn't given up when the world had shown her its cruelest side, and neither would she. Over the next few weeks, she made every effort to restore the safety and peace that their little family had built. Reinforcements were added to the home, and her neighbors rallied around her, offering to keep an eye on her property and check in regularly. Grace continued to be vigilant, her protective instinct heightened, but her demeanor softened when it came to her puppies and the woman she now trusted implicitly. Despite everything, their bond only grew stronger. One afternoon, the woman received an unexpected call. It was from the local animal shelter, where Grace's story had become a symbol of resilience and hope. "We've organized a community event," the shelter director explained. "We want to honor Grace and everything she's done, not just for you and her puppies, but for all the animals she's inspired people to care about. Would you and Grace be willing to attend?" The woman hesitated, glancing at Grace, who was napping peacefully in a patch of sunlight. She worried about exposing Grace to crowds again, but then she thought of all the good that had come from sharing her story: the animals who had found homes, the people who had been moved to act, the countless lives Grace had unknowingly touched. "We'd be honored," she said finally, her voice filled with pride. The day of the event arrived, crisp and cool beneath a bright blue sky. The woman loaded Grace and the now fully grown puppies into her car, each one wagging their tail as though they sensed something special was happening. When they arrived at the park, the sight that greeted them took the woman's breath away. A large crowd had gathered, many holding signs with Grace's name or pictures of their own rescue animals. A banner stretched across the stage reading, "Celebrating Grace, a story of survival, love, and hope." As the woman walked Grace and the puppies toward the stage, people stepped aside, their faces filled with admiration. Children pointed excitedly, their parents smiling warmly. Grace walked beside the woman, her tail wagging gently, her body relaxed and confident. She was no longer the broken, battered dog who had been left for dead. She was a survivor, a beacon of hope, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. When they reached the stage, the shelter director stepped forward to greet them. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She turned to the crowd and raised a microphone. "Today, we celebrate not just Grace, but what her story represents. She is a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, kindness and love can prevail. She is proof that every life is worth fighting for." The crowd erupted into applause, and the woman felt tears sting her eyes as she looked down at Grace. The dog sat calmly at her side, her gaze scanning the crowd as though she understood the moment's significance. The director handed the woman the microphone, motioning for her to speak. Taking a deep breath, the woman stepped forward. "When I found Grace on that dark road, I didn't think she would make it through the night. She was so broken, so hurt, and yet she fought with everything she had, not for herself, but for her puppies. Over these past months, she's shown me what true strength looks like. She's taught me how to love without fear, how to fight for what matters, and how to believe in second chances." Her voice broke, but she pressed on. "Grace isn't just my hero, she's all of ours. She's a reminder that no matter how hard life gets, there is always hope. And it's up to us to make sure that every animal, every living being, gets the love and care they deserve." The crowd cheered, their applause echoing through the park. Grace turned to look at the woman, her tail wagging slightly, her eyes warm and trusting. The woman knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around the dog's sturdy frame. "You did this," she whispered. "You changed the world." As the event continued, people came forward to meet Grace and share their own stories of how she had inspired them. A young girl held up a drawing she had made of Grace and her puppies, her eyes shining with pride. An older man with tears in his eyes explained how Grace's story had moved him to adopt an elderly dog who had been overlooked at a shelter. Everywhere the woman turned, she saw the ripple effect of Grace's resilience and love. That evening, back at home, the woman sat in the backyard with Grace and the puppies. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a sky in shades of pink and orange. The puppies wrestled playfully on the grass, their joyful barks filling the air. Grace lay beside the woman, her body relaxed, her scars softened by time. "You've given me so much, Grace," the woman said, her voice soft but steady. "You've shown me what it means to fight for love, to believe in hope, and to never give up. You're more than just a survivor, you're a miracle." Grace lifted her head, resting it on the woman's lap. Her eyes, filled with quiet wisdom and unshakable trust, seemed to say everything that words couldn't. Together, they sat in the fading light, their bond unbreakable, their journey of transformation, and their future filled with endless possibilities. And for the first time in her life, Grace was not just alive, she was home. For her family, for their safety, and for the love they had built together.